We are live here on YouTube for anyone that is watching this either live or after the fact. I'm Evan Neufeld, and I am a certified financial planner professional here in Saskatoon. And I wanted to talk a little bit about RRSPs, and because there's a big deadline that comes up soon, and for many people, they are unsure of what that actually means. And so I wanted to answer a few questions that I've received already that might be valuable for you as well. So if you are watching this after the live, you can send in questions below. If we're past the deadline, unfortunately, it's not going to be super relevant for you, but general RSP questions, that'll help me make content for the future. So first things first, what is the RSP deadline? The RSP deadline for this year, or for any year, I guess, is actually 60 days after the end of the year. So the way that that you want to think about RSP deadlines is that it's all based on the previous tax year. So if you want to contribute to an RSP for the 2023 tax year, you have 60 days of this year to still make a contribution to get that deduction for the previous year. So I guess it's probably worth explaining too how an RSP works. When you make a contribution to an RSP, you are reducing your income, which means that you pay tax on less income. So if you are typically employed, you've got a regular job, and you have taxes taken off of your paycheck before you get it, it's the vast majority of people, then you will get a refund when you make an RSP contribution. And that's just based on your marginal tax rate. I won't get into that necessarily right now, but say your marginal tax rate is 50% and you make a contribution of $2,000, that means you would get a refund of $1,000 when you file your taxes. Okay, so that's the benefit, high level, of contributing to an RSP. And so you have the opportunity to contribute to an RSP to reduce last year's income for the first 60 days of this year. So this year is kind of unique because we've got 29 days in February. So this year's deadline is February 29th. That is tomorrow. So that's why I wanted to do this live today, just in case you were forgetting about the deadlines. So you can always make an RSP contribution, but if you just want to do it for the last year's income, that's the deadline. So there's no like hard and final deadline for actually getting money into an RSP. It's just if you wanted to do it for the previous tax year. Okay, so how much can you actually contribute to your RSP? I've got this question a lot, and so there's kind of two answers there, or maybe a few ways to think about it. So maybe I'll back it up and say, how can you actually accumulate room to contribute in the first place? So that's all based on you having earned income. Earned income is different than like dividends and things like that, but earned income, you can high level think of it just like your job. So when you have employment income, there's a few other different things that count too, but typically employment income, 18% of your income will be able to be used to make RSP contributions in the next calendar year or beyond, okay? So when you work, you'll work, say this whole year, and you accrue your room. When you file your taxes on your notice of assessment, you're gonna get a number on there and it'll say 18% of your income is now allowable RSP contribution room. And you can do that in the next calendar year, okay? So you have to be careful of the timing of when it is earned and then when you can use it, okay? So that might be something to keep in mind if you're someone that's already maximized your RSP, or this is the first time you're doing it, or the first year that you have earned income, things like that. There are a few wrinkles that if you have a group plan at work or a pension plan, you can do it in the same calendar year, but if you're doing it on your own, it's a little bit different that way. So again, the way that you accrue room is 18% of your income, up to a maximum last year of $30,780. I'll do the math for you. If you are earning at least $171,000, then that's the maximum that you could ever do for the next calendar year. Okay, so people often get that confused between how much, like how you can actually contribute to an RSP. you say, okay, well, there's this annual maximum, but my notice of assessment and my CRA account online says this number, which might be way higher, then, sorry, I'm talking to Siri here on my other device. It's talking to me there. So those two numbers kind of confuse people. Is it the 18% or is it the maximum? It's the maximum. So if you have, say, a number on your notice of assessment that says your allowable contribution room for 2023 was $50,000, but your annual maximum that you would earn might be 15,000, well, you can do the 50 if you happen to have $50,000 cash sitting around to do RSP contributions. You can totally do that. Okay, so that's kind of the difference between the annual accrual versus the actual contribution maximum. Okay, so with the contribution maximum, this isn't a question someone's asked, but it's a wrinkle that I'll include there. There is a bit of wiggle room on how much you can actually contribute. So say again, you have that $50,000 maximum contribution room. Technically, you can do $52,000, so there's a $2,000 wiggle room that allows you to put money in. You won't actually get a deduction for it. You don't need to have the room for it. It can just kind of park there. I don't know why someone would want to do that. I just call that kind of like the oopsie-daisy wiggle room if you get it wrong by accident. So you don't really want to over-contribute to an RSP, or you definitely don't want to. The penalties are egregious. It's, I think it's 1% per month that you have too much money in there. So there's a whole rigmarole that you have to go through to file some paperwork and deal with CRA to get that money out and let them know properly that it has since been removed so they can stop charging you those penalties, because that's crazy. So before you make an RSP contribution, you want to make sure that you actually can and that you actually have the room to do so. If you have a pension at work, if you have an RSP plan at work, you might not even notice that you have an RSP, but you would in that case, because a pension also reduces how much you can contribute to an RSP, so you can't do both in the same amounts, I guess. Okay, so if you have a pension at work and it's a really juicy pension, you might not even have any RSP room, even if you're a really high income earner. So you have to be really, really careful that you're not in that situation where you don't have any room and you can't even contribute to it. So that's a big thing to keep in mind. So how do you figure that out? Again, your notice of assessment, you get that annually, and then you can log into your CRA My account, and you can find that information right on the homepage there. They'll have the amount listed for how much you can do for the 2023 calendar year. Because again, in those first 60 days, that's the calendar, or the tax year, I guess, that we're really dealing with. Okay. Anyone that's watching along here, any questions, you can pop it in the chat. Appreciate the like there if this has been valuable so far. I've just got a few more questions that I had that are listed, but I'd love to hear from you guys if you have anything that's top of mind for you. This isn't going to be an all-day live stream here unless I get tons and tons of questions, of course, but this is good. Okay, so next one, should you do an RRSP loan? You might see ads from banks, stuff online about doing this, emails from certain financial institutions saying, hey, you could borrow some money and get a big tax refund. It's like, should you actually do that? So a few things to think about. Classic CFP answer here, it depends. Everything depends, and so I'll give you the few things to consider to help you know whether the depends actually is valuable for you. Okay, so first things first, an RSP loan means that you borrow money to contribute to your RSP. You don't get that interest. That interest is not deductible because that's just the way it works. If you're taking an investment loan to contribute to a non-registered account, you can deduct that interest later for next year. But if you're taking out a loan to contribute to an RSP, you can't deduct that interest. So the big thing that you want to think about now is the current interest rate environment, which is bananas. Like the interest rates are as high as we've seen them in the last 15 years or so. So if you're borrowing, say, on a home equity line of credit, something like that, your interest rate on that loan is going to be very high. So prime right now, I think it's 7.2. So if you have a home equity line of credit that says it's prime plus 1, that means you're going to be paying 8.2% on that loan. So the big question, $1 million question is, if you take out a loan to contribute to your RSP, how are you going to pay off the loan? So a lot of the content that you'll see online says, okay, well, you take out a loan and then you use your refund to pay off the loan and magic. Okay, let's go back and do the math here. So let's say that you're in the 50% tax bracket, which the vast majority of Canadians are not. You're in a much lower tax bracket, but let's just say for easy math, you're in the 50% tax bracket. So say you wanted to do a $2,000 contribution to your RSP. You borrow it from your line of credit, you take $2,000 there, now you start getting charged interest every day. Then $2,000 goes into your RSP. Then when you get your tax return, again, you're in the 50% tax bracket, so you get half of that contribution back as a refund, assuming you had already paid taxes on your income already. Okay, so in this case, you put 2,000 in, you get $1,000 back. You take that $1,000 and you can pay it off on the line of credit if you want, but now you still have $1,000 on the line of credit, right? So there's almost no situation where your refund is actually going to be able to pay off the balance of your RSP loan. The situation where that is not true and your refund could pay it off is that if you have other deductions from other places, like maybe you've already made more contributions elsewhere, or you have medical expenses or childcare expenses, all these different things that provide enough deductions so that your total refund would actually be able to pay off your loan. It's like, okay, so now we're getting into a little bit more likely a scenario, but you know, because the interest rates are so high right now, figuring out how you're going to pay off that loan is really the only thing that really matters, because it's not a no-brainer to just like borrow money for free anymore. It's expensive. So if you're going to carry that loan throughout the year, it is not an obvious thing to say, yeah, you should just borrow money to contribute to RSP. I don't think so. If I were to give a generalized advice there, I'd say don't do it. So those are kind of the things to consider with RSP loans. Any questions about that, you can pop them in the chat. Hopefully that was reasonably clear. But again, it's a classic, it depends. There could be a situation where you have unusually high income or unusually high deductions, or you received an inheritance which is not taxable to you, but you had other taxable income, all sorts of different things that you could figure out that are highly unique to your own situation. But generally speaking, I don't recommend RSP loans to people, just because the vast majority of people that are doing them don't have the cash flow to do it. And the reason they don't have enough cash flow to do it is they typically don't have enough discipline to save throughout the year and all these kind of things. And so they kind of cater to the person that would not be a good fit to be taking on debt. If you're someone that is thinking they need to catch up on their retirement savings, I would say you should probably speak with a financial planner to figure out, are you actually that far behind, or what are the other options that you could consider to get back on track for your retirement savings. In many, many, many cases, leverage, meaning borrowing to invest, is not the answer. It's just going to create a problem in a different way. So as a default recommendation, I would not lean towards RSP loans to get up to speed on your overall retirement savings. Highly situational, so don't take it as blanket advice there that you might see in an email or an advertisement or something like that. Okay, here's a weird question, or I shouldn't say that. I think it's weird because I live in this world, but the question is, what is the rate of return on an RSP? It's like, okay, this is kind of a high-level concept that we need to figure out. So an RSP, let's spell out the acronym here. It's a Registered Retirement Savings Plan. It is not an investment in and of itself at all. It's just a bucket, and it allow you to put investments in your bucket. So if you put cash in your RSP bucket, then you, the rate of return is whatever you can get on cash, functionally nothing. If you're in a money market fund or something that's similar to that, you could get a few percent interest now, I guess. But your investment rate of return is all based on the investment that you choose. And so no, the RSP isn't an investment itself that you buy. You would purchase an investment to put inside your RSP. if that kind of makes sense. So I got a question here from Glenda. Give me a second here, Glenda, and I'll read it. Gross income is 115,000, 5% company match, which I have maxed. Congratulations, that's an awesome workplace benefit. Good for you. Should I contribute beyond the 5% or contribute more on TFSA, having some room on it? So I don't want to accidentally give you bad advice here necessarily, just because we generally give specific advice on this given the context of one's entire financial situation. But some things that you could think about here, your 5% match, doing as much of that as possible is awesome. That's really great. For many people that have a workplace plan, they don't really have as many investment options necessarily. So if you're totally fine with the investment options that they present, great. That's something to consider there. Given the contributions that you're putting in there, your gross income is likely going to bring you down below that threshold. I'm not sure which province you're in, and I don't have my tax rates in front of me for every province. But generally speaking, the best bang for your buck is contributing when you're in a higher tax bracket than where you anticipate being when you're in retirement. Yes, you need a crystal ball to figure that out a little bit, unless you have really good assumptions baked into your financial plan. But most provinces, that threshold now is around 105 or 110,000, and then that middle bracket is usually pretty big. Generally, it's between like 50 and 105, 110, something like that. So your contributions, Glenda, here already would bring you down below that threshold. So any additional money into your RSP would not be at your gross marginal tax rate. It would bring it down to, here in Saskatchewan, it's a 33% bracket. In most provinces, it's kind of similar between that 30 and 35. And so for an RSP, again, all depends on your situation, all the other things that you have saved, what your retirement timeline is, and whatever. But that's something just to consider, that the bang for your buck has largely already been achieved by reducing your gross income already from that higher tax bracket. Now your marginal tax rate is in the lower bracket. And so from my perspective, TFSAs are a really great tool to work alongside a well-constructed RSP plan. And the nice thing with the TFSA is that if in future years it makes more sense to make a one-time contribution to an RSP, you can take money out of your TFSA and then put in the RSP. And so as a holding place, at the very least, a TFSA is a good option. So those are some things to consider there. Again, I just want to be careful not to give too specific advice here necessarily, but those are just a few things to think about anyways when contributing to an RSP in addition to a company match. But that's great. Having 5% match is awesome. That's, from what I've seen anyways, for most people that have really good or really high levels of retirement income saved, the vast majority of them have workplace contribution plans, because it's tough to save, like it's tough to have that discipline. And so if it goes into the investment account before you even receive it, it's a miracle. Like it feels like found money. So there's so many people that I've seen that just don't have a whole lot of capacity to save on their own and whatever, but it's because they contributed before they even got their money. It's like it's forced savings, almost like a mortgage is in a way for contributing to real estate equity. So that's great. Just got another comment here. Hi, I have no question here, but just want to say I really appreciate your easily digestible podcast content. Thanks for your work you do in the Canadian-centric topics. Awesome. Thanks so much for the comment. I'm glad it's valuable. If anybody that's watching this now, I do have a podcast. It goes by the same name of this channel, Canadian Money Roadmap. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. I've got 120 episodes that you can go find. I try to cover things from basic stuff to relatively complex things. I leave a lot of the complexity to some people I know in the industry that really like to focus on that kind of stuff. But I'm a big believer that even if you have tons of money or you have no money, everybody needs refreshers on the basics, or what I would call the foundational items related to Canadian finance. And so that's why I did the podcast. That's why I'm trying out YouTube live here. This is kind of fun. I might do this a little bit more often. The feedback here um, from a few of you watching here has been pretty good. So um, last thing that was on my list of questions here. So for those of you that have just joined, I'm hopefully going to post this video afterwards, so you can go back and listen to those. But I covered the RSP deadline, how much can you contribute, how do you get your room, should you do an RSP loan, what's the rate of return on RSPs, and so then the last one that I'm going to talk about here, unless I get some more questions, is what happens to an RRSP if you die. No one wants to think about it. It's really important to talk about it before it actually happens. And so an RSP is something called a registered account. So that's that first R in the acronym, registered. And registered plans here in Canada allow you to have what's called a beneficiary. Broadly speaking, some plans have a different name for it. TFSA is included if you have a spouse, all sorts of different things. But with an RSP, you can name a beneficiary. And a beneficiary is someone who gets your money after you die. Okay, so if you pass away, I'm going to give a few different scenarios here so that hopefully it's helpful. So if you're married, so maybe I'll just use my own example. So I'm married and I have an RSP. I name my wife as the beneficiary of my RSP. So if I die, what happens is my wife would then take over my RSP. It just transfers over to her name and there's no tax implications in between. Okay, so it's very simple and really straightforward. That way, a little bit of paperwork for you and your broker or your advisor, whoever's doing it, to actually do that. But it's pretty clean and simple as long as the beneficiary lines up and you are a spouse and the will doesn't conflict with anything that would say in the beneficiaries or your marriage status. So that's pretty clean and simple. However, if you're a single person by death, divorce, never married, whatever, or common law. We have common law rules here in Canada. If you're a single person, what happens there is that you can still name a beneficiary on your RSP. So say you name your buddy Bill as your beneficiary of your RSP. Good news, bad news. Good news is that money goes over to Bill in its entirety. So you die with $100,000 in there, it goes over to him, he gets a check. The problem is your estate, meaning whatever you've all left behind that kind of exists as this like notional lump of stuff. So it's everything you own. And the problem is your estate is left with the tax bill for that. So how the tax bill is calculated: when you die with RSP assets and you cannot roll it over to a spouse, meaning anything else, any other outcome, you don't have a spouse, every dollar that's included in your RSP on the day that you die is included in your taxable income in that year. Okay, so person with $500,000 RSP, saved their whole life, they die on the way home from their retirement party, whatever, and yeah, $500,000 in there, they pass away. In that year, they would have income, taxable income, in addition to their other income that they have from all of their sources. They would have income of $500,000. So the risk here is that you named a beneficiary on that RSP, and the $500,000 is actually gone, but the give or take $250,000 tax bill is still with your estate. In some cases, the estate would have other assets. So like say you had a massive bank account or something like that, other investments, whatever, that are still left in the estate. The estate would have to pay those taxes from either other assets, or else guess what? Your buddy Bill is getting a not so friendly letter saying you, as the beneficiary of this account, owe us money. I have seen this before. Trust me, this is ugly, and this happens with adult children. So like, say for example, mom and dad are married, they save really well, they built up a huge portfolio, most of it is in registered plans, very, very common. Mom dies, dad's left, dad dies the next day or next year, it doesn't matter. But he decides to name all the kids as beneficiaries. Kids are not all on good terms. This happens. Everybody's on good terms until family and money get involved. Again, seen it too many times. And one brother's in New Brunswick, the other one's on Vancouver Island, and the other one is in Regina. It's a nightmare to get everybody together. One of them's got gambling debts, whatever. This is an extreme example, but people aren't on the same page financially. So say in this example, all the money gets distributed to them as beneficiaries, great. But the tax bill comes back and says, okay, mom and dad left us all a tax bill of $300,000 or whatever it is. Now, you as the beneficiaries all have to get together and do your part to do it, or else CRA is coming from you. And CRA is an enemy that you do not want to have. I know some people that do some work with people who are cross-border or dual citizens and dealing with the IRS in the States. I would have thought that they'd be a little bit more scary to deal with from a tax perspective, but apparently they are they're like puppy dogs compared to the CRA with like how strict we are here in Canada with dealing with stuff like that. So anyways, all that to say, what happens to your RSP when you die? It goes somewhere else. So it goes either to your beneficiary that you named, and if that's your spouse, that's great because that has a tax-free rollover provision. If you name someone else, just be aware that the tax bill is unavoidable. Again, back to the spouse thing, if you roll it over to your spouse and then they pass away, the tax bill is left there. So this is not any sort of strategy for avoiding taxes, it's just where it's going to end up, okay? So generally speaking, if you're a single person who doesn't have a spouse, the simplest way to do it would be to name your estate as the beneficiary of your RSP. This is not advice, but that is just the simplest way to do it because then the assets go to the estate first and then it can be distributed as per your will at that time. And again, if you don't have a will, that's a big problem. This is advice, get a will. If you own anything or if you're married or you're common law, you should get a will. That just keeps your government out of as many decisions as possible. They're not going to take everything, but they're just going to decide what order things get distributed and who gets what. Personally, I don't want that. So anyways, that's kind of what happens to an RSP if you die. Lots of factors to consider there, but yeah, any final questions here? We're almost at half an hour. That's actually longer than I was anticipating going here. Any last questions from people in the chat? Anything about things that I've already said? Any clarification? I'll give it a second here. Sip my cold coffee. Glenda left me another comment here saying, it's great that you're on YouTube. I recommended your podcast to some of my friends, and surprisingly, lots of them don't listen to podcasts as much as they watch on YouTube. Yeah, I found that too, actually, that people that listen to podcasts really listen to podcasts, and people that don't will not. And so I thought showing up here on YouTube in some form or another, I work with clients, like doing content is not my job here, and so I had a little bit of time this morning before some meetings this afternoon that I thought, let's give this a try. Hopefully it'll be valuable to somebody. And DW Volleyball, it's thanks for the comment saying that was helpful to know. Thanks. Absolutely glad to do it. Teddy's asking here, hey, I have an off-topic somewhat. What are recommendations for converting to a lift to a riff? Is it too late if a person starts melting a lift? Thank you. In Manitoba. Okay, Manitoba's got some interesting rules, and so again, this would, hate to say it, Teddy, it depends, and it depends on a variety of other things. I'm forgetting Manitoba's rules off the top of my head, but very recently, if you had a lira, so that's old pension money, you could convert that to something called a PRIF, so that's a prescribed RIF, and I think the rules there are the same as here in Saskatchewan, where the difference between a LIF and a PRIF is that there's no maximums. So if you're already in a LIF, boy, I'm thinking on my feet here, this, you might be able to, because the rules have changed, you could inquire to see if your Manitoba LIF could be converted to a PRIF, and then functionally it is a RIF. The reason to do that, For anybody that's watching here that's not familiar with these new acronyms, LIF is a life income fund, and that's what happens once you start to pop a hole in your bucket. So the previous iteration of that is something called a LIRA, so it's a locked-in retirement account that comes from an old pension, and the pension money then has to stay with pension rules. And so once it's in this LIRA bucket, eventually once you want to start taking money out of it, you have to pop a hole in the bottom. That means there's a minimum amount that you have to take out of it. That's your hole that drips out. If it's a LIF, depending on your province and whether it's a federal jurisdiction and whatever, there's a million rules here. Generally speaking, a LIF has a maximum. So I say there's a lid on the top, there's a hole in the bottom and a lid on the top, meaning you can't just take out however much you want. You can make your hole a little bit bigger, but that's about it. It's pretty restrictive there. Whereas a RIF, a registered retirement income fund, that's the second life of an RSP. So you can do that whenever you want, but when you turn 71, that's the final year that you can have an RSP before you have to convert it to a RIF. Again, your RSP is a bucket, a RIF is a bucket with a hole in it. And so from my perspective, there's no lid on the top of a RIF, meaning you can take out however much you want. I like the flexibility, but a lot of people are their own worst enemies. I don't know you, Teddy, or your situation, but an unrestricted plan just gives you more options that way to spend it, to give it away, to do whatever you want with it while you're alive. A LIF typically just has more maximum restrictions on it for many people that might run out of money if they're just going to spend too much or give too much away or any other type of thing. Having those maximum withdrawal restrictions could be worth it. So yeah, in your case, Teddy, because the Manitoba PRIF is relatively new, you might have converted to a LIF prior to that rule coming into place. So you might have the privilege of converting your LIF to a PRIF. And so, yeah, I see your follow-up comments here. Hopefully that was valuable for you, and you can look into that. Yep. Any other comments here for anyone that's just joining? Unfortunately, I'm just kind of wrapping up my RSP question summaries here. So if there's any other questions, Bella, thank you for suggesting advice for single individuals. I enjoyed listening to your podcast. Appreciate it if you can include advice tailored for singles. Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Bella. I will try my best to do that. The unfortunate thing with our system here in Canada is that a lot of the opportunities to do things like splitting income in retirement, beneficiary designations, like I was just talking about 10 minutes ago. So many of those things are just available for people that are married or common law, and so even things like, rollovers after you pass to preserve a little bit of tax efficiency and things like that, they just don't have the same privileges for single people. So I will definitely keep that in mind for things to keep in mind for future content as well. I appreciate you mentioning that. But just off the top of my head, the way that our system is structured, it is just objectively harder to live in Canada from an income and a tax perspective as a single person. To qualify to buy a house, incredibly difficult. To keep your tax bill reasonably low in retirement, incredibly difficult, because there's kind of the I have an economics background, so like the economies of scale of being married, like you don't have double the expenses, and so it's just cheaper to live as two people. And when you're retired and if you're over 65, some sources of income can be split between the two of you. So think of this like the rate of income for someone that has $100,000 as a single person versus two people that have 50,000, the tax burden is less than half. And so the ability to split income between spouses later on in life really makes retirement income planning a lot easier, just because that tax burden can be split between two people more efficiently than during working years. So anyways, I'm rambling here a little bit, Pella, but I appreciate that, and I will keep that in mind for future content, to keep singles in mind wherever I can find some opportunities to add value there. Last comment, final comment. Sound quality on the podcast has been great. This new YouTube content with the camera is also just as great quality. Cool. I'm using this mic setup. It's a little bit new for me, so I'm just trying this out, and this is just in my phone. I got really good light here. It's a nice sunny day here in Saskatoon, and so this is I'm getting natural light coming in, and this is my podcast studio here, right here in my office. So I don't, like I said, I don't do content professionally. I record on Mondays after I come up with an idea. I put it out on Wednesdays. It seems crazy, but after you do it for a few years, you kind of get used to doing it. I do have a different setup over here. Again, this is maybe just for interest's sake. There we go. I've got my camera with a new teleprompter, so I'm hoping to do that with some more YouTube content in the future. Got a whole bunch of new people just hopping on the stream here. I was just going to wrap up, but if anybody does have any RSP questions, feel free to pop them in the chat quickly, and I'll stay on for a few more minutes here. Doesn't look like there's a whole lot here. So anyways, thank you so much for all of you that added questions in the chat and the few of you that were watching. Anybody that's watching afterwards as well. Anybody that's new, I'm Evan Neufeld, Certified Financial Planner here in Saskatoon. And my colleague and I, we work with clients on financial planning basis. I do investment management for clients as well, but I'm not taking on new clients in that regard. So if you are looking for someone to help you out with a financial plan, you can shoot me an email over at hello@evanneufeld.com, or you can go to evanneufeld.com, just my website, and you can find some info there. And my colleague Jordan would be your primary contact after that, but glad to have some conversations with you to see if working with us on a financial plan would be valuable for you. Anyways, thanks so much for taking the time to join me on the live stream today. Hopefully we'll do this again. Thanks a lot.